Nuneaton, the jewel of the South Midlands, the town who gave us such great men as George Eliot and Larry Grayson, the throbbing heart of this teeming metropolis, the pearl of the CV13 postcode, down by the roundabout and up the one-way system, is Nuneaton Town Hall, where we can find none other than Nuneaton's Mr. Entertainment.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls. I'm Barry Tadcaster, and this is my friend Ken Jeffens, who is an Orang Pendek. Hello, my name is Ken Jeffens, and I am an Orang Pendek. Unlike the other Orang Pendeks, I do not come from the Indonesian island of Sumatra. I come from the London borough of Lewisham, where I am employed by Lewisham Town Council as an ombudsman. So Ken, what's on the agenda this week? This week we are going to be seeing a woodcock nearing the Gene and getting a surge of strength whenever we see eels.
This episode is dedicated with much love to the memory of Wolfgang Schmidt, one of our oldest friends and certainly the first major benefactor the Centre for Fortean Zoology ever had. He died of COVID just before Christmas, another victim of a horrible year. God bless you, Wolfie. In the last episode, I spoke to Richard Freeman following the death of Brian Sykes, Professor of Genetics at Wolfson College, Oxford. But after we had spoken about Brian's death, our conversation went on to pleasanter topics.
Okay, Richard, we're all in an extended lockdown in all but name, and it's looking like more and more countries across the world are refusing to allow visitors from Britain. But if things actually do miraculously all work out, what's the next expedition you'd like to go on?
Well, I'm hoping to go back to Mongolia, where there's an American film company that want to do they're doing a series, hopefully, and they want to do a trip to Mongolia to search for the death worm with me. So that's hopefully on the cards for next summer. Apart from... Oh, sorry, go on.
Tell me about the lure of the death worm.
The what of the death worm?
The lure, the attraction,
I thought you meant lore as in the folklore surrounding it. The lore of the death worm. The lore of the death worm is that it has a pedigree that goes back to the likes of Roy Chapman Andrews, who they based Indiana Jones on. He's a paleontologist who was first told about it, and then all through the Soviet era, there were Russian and Mongolian people searching for it. And it is such a bizarre creature in such a remote area. If you've been to the Gobi Desert, you'll know just how amazing and alien and spooky and unearthly this place is. It's of all the many places I've been, the Gobi is my favourite, and it's so vast and so uncharted that an unknown animal could easily live there. And we're talking about a creature about a metre long. We're not talking about the sandworms from June or anything like that.
What about the attributes that have been given to it here in the West, so that it can give electric shocks and spit venom and...
Well, when I was over there in 2005, we travelled for about 1,000 miles through the desert and talked to dozens and dozens of nomads who had seen it. And they say the electrical blast, which they refer to as throwing lightning, they say that's apocryphal. It doesn't do that, it's just folklore. One man said he saw it after rainfall and its scales were all glittering, reflecting the light from the rain, and he thinks that's maybe where the idea of the electricity comes from. They do fear it though. They believe it's venomous and it can spit a corrosive yellow venom, which acts much like acid, and it will throw a whole area into panic if one is sighted. One man told us how when he was tending his family's cows and goats as a teenager, he'd seen one and ran to tell his parents, and they packed up their circular tents they have and rounded up their livestock and moved out of the area. We heard several stories like that of a death worm turning up and the whole area being sent into a unbridled panic.
What do you think the death worm is?
It's one of two things. It's either Amphisbaena or worm lizard, which are sausage-shaped, burrowing reptiles. They're not lizards, they're not snakes, they're a little group of their own. Very odd and poorly studied reptiles from North Africa, parts of Europe, and South and Central America. None are known in Asia, but it could well be that there's a large, very chunky one living beneath the sands of the Gobi Desert. And my other guess is that it's a new species of sand boa. It's not the Tartary sand boa because it's too big and it's the wrong colour. One of the nomads we spoke to said that there were two worms. There's the Alroy hoihoi, which is a death worm, and he said there's the smaller grey one that they call the horsetail worm, rather than the death worm, and that does sound like the Tartary sand boa. So if this smaller one is a sand boa, the bigger one could be a large undiscovered sand boa.
It's nice for a change to be able to bring you some good news. So often I find myself sitting here in my favourite armchair telling you dubious things, such as the rather dodgy, in my opinion, attempts by Nature Reserve in India to reintroduce cheetahs into an ecosystem that's not seen them for at least 80 years. So what's the problem with that? Well, the only known surviving population of Asiatic cheetahs is in central Iran, and the latest census from a couple of years ago counted less than 50 individuals. Once upon a time they were found all the way from Central Asia to Arabia and were well known in what is now India and Pakistan, but human predation drove them to the edge of extinction. However, there is evidence they may still be hanging on in other areas. Officers of the Badger State Nature Reserve in Turkmenistan saw a cheetah in this area in 2014. 2 years later, a skin was seen for sale in a market in Afghanistan, and it appears that a cheetah was killed by a motor vehicle in Iran back in 1991. 30 years ago, Kanapapur in Madhya Pradesh in India was identified as a perfect location for the first sanctuary for Asiatic lions outside the Gir forest in Gujarat. But after 30 years of problems with local politics, there are still no lions there. This level of political chicanery does lead one to wonder whether it is a suitable place after all for a cheetah sanctuary. However, there is another problem. The survival of the subspecies outside its final sanctuary in mid-Iran is admittedly questionable. However, if another population of the Asiatic cheetahs was to be found, or if there's going to be some new discovery in genetics, which means that specimens from the Iranians' gene pool could be transmitted to India, the fact that there's already a population of one of the African subspecies living there would make a nonsense of trying to save the Asian subspecies. There are a number of other possible outcomes, and believe me, none of them very good. But at the beginning I told you I was going to bring you some good news, and boy have I got good news for you. A female Yangtze giant soft-shell turtle has just been found in a lake in Vietnam. The Yangtze giant soft-shell turtle is an extremely rare species of turtle in the family Trionychidae. The species is endemic to eastern and southern China and northern Vietnam. Until this year, only 3 or 4 living specimens were known, 1 in China in a zoo and 2 to 3 in Vietnam in the wild. This is following the deaths of a wild individual in Vietnam in January 2016 and a captive individual in China in 2019, and it's listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. It may be the largest living freshwater turtle in the world, and until now none of the surviving specimens that were known were female. The Hoan Kiem turtles were of this species. Stories of the Hoan Kiem turtle began in the 15th century with Le Loi, who became an emperor of Vietnam and founder of the Le dynasty. According to legend, Le Loi had the sword named Heaven's Will given to him by the golden turtle god Kim Koi. One day, not long after the war and the Chinese had accepted Vietnam's independence, Le Loi was out boating on the lake. Suddenly the golden turtle god surfaced, prompting Le Loi to return Heaven's will and thank the divine turtle for its help. The golden turtle god took back the sword and disappeared into the depths of the lake. Le Loi then renamed the lake Hoan Kiem Lake, or Hoan Kiem, meaning the Lake of the Returned Sword. These turtles were seen intermittently in the lake for hundreds of years. The last individual, affectionately known to locals as Ku Rua, meaning the great-grandfather turtle in Vietnamese, was reported dead on the 19th of January 2016. A local saw the body of the turtle floating and reported it to the authorities. The last time it had been seen alive was on the 21st of December 2015, which is, in a bizarre synchronicity, and I won't tell you that Doc Shields always says there's no such thing as a coincidence, 5 years ago tomorrow. And it is very heartening, 5 years later, almost to the day, to be able to tell you that all the species may not be dead after all. So, for once, good news. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name's John Downs, but you'll know that already because you've been watching the show from the beginning. And we're doing something slightly different this evening. We have got together Dr. Max Blake, Cal Marshall, who isn't looking at the camera and should be, and Richard Freeman, who has got a dog and a can of cider. And it's unusual to have such luminaries of the CFZ all in the same place at the same time. So what I thought would be a nice thing to do would be to try and carry on the sort of thing we tried last year, about a year ago, with Richard and Carl. Now we've got Max as well, and we're just going to talk about various topics and just do it informally, and we'll run it over the next few shows. So let's start off. Carl has got Lilith Tinkerbell. So let's start off. Max, you can go first, because you recently gave me that book Wilding about the experiments and project at Knapp Castle in Sussex. And it is a fantastic book. So what I want to talk about tonight, the topic for tonight, at least the first topic for tonight, is going to be rewilding. How far can it go in Britain? How far should it go in Britain? And how far do you think people will be able to get away with in Britain? And basically you can butt in, interrupt each other, say what you want, because we are all friends here, and we'll start off. Max, rewilding.
I would suggest probably 7, 10 and 5.
There's no answer to that. Would you like to expound, Dr. Blake?
I think the key thing is it will never go as far as it could do, because of public opposition to bringing back large predators. They've had such a nightmare with the seagull releases, and that's sort of a fairly small macro carnivore, and then you start looking at things like lynxes, and it gets more difficult, and then every single time you start taking a size up from there, it's just going to get fiddlier and fiddlier to actually try and get the public to be on side. I don't know if there's been a feasibility study looking at wolves and bears off the top of my head, but it wouldn't surprise me if those are getting towards the upper limit of how much space is actually available up there that's out of the way. There's plenty of food. We know there's absolutely tons of food, but it's whether there's enough wilderness space for them to survive. I wouldn't have a clue.
Isn't there a project going on in Bristol, bears at the moment?
Is there?
Apparently so. There's like they're going to try and reintroduce them in a large area, and apparently the public are allowed to go see them, but to see them from above, apparently it's a big expensive.
Okay.
I've only been told this. I don't know. This is
Not Wild Place.
I don't know.
Okay.
I know it's bears, and I know it's Bristol.
Because Bristol Zoo's sister attraction, Wild Place, has got their latest sort of expansion was all on European megafauna, and they brought in wolves and bears in a very large enclosure, and then you can go up on top and see them from.
I think that's
above.
probably the same thing.
So it might well be that apparently has been very well received. But it's things like that I think are going to be quite helpful in actually trying to
A bit at a time.
kick at public opinion. But how many of those people who enjoyed it would be very happy with actually living cheek by jowl with bears? I'm not so sure.
I was shocked when I read the Wilding book about the amount of opposition they had to letting ragwort grow free.
It's amazing, isn't it? Their example of ragwort is quite impressive. In that so many people in the countryside think that it's just this horrendous, terrible thing that kills horses and cattle, and then Isabella Tree puts it far more succinctly than I could ever do. But if you look at the amount of dried weight, I think goats have to eat 2 or 3 times their own body weight in a day to actually die from ragwort poisoning, which is obviously impossible in real world circumstances. And the whole study that initially started it all off was based on suspected cases of ragwort poisoning reported by vets, which were completely unproven. They were just, if people thought that might have been a contributing factor rather than actually looking into it in any great detail. And that there were a whole lot of other bits of flawed science on it, but fundamentally if cows and horses are given an alternative to eat that's not ragwort, remarkably they eat it because they're not dumb enough just to eat ragwort. But if you put them in barren, stale fields just with some ragwort growing and there's nothing really else for them to do or to eat other than the ragwort, then that's when the issues arise. But even then, it's still usually suspected cases.
And things like yew trees are far more poisonous.
Yeah, and they're in every graveyard in the country.
They are, yeah. I mean, I suppose with yew, it's a known thing that you don't grow yew in hedgerows for horses in particular. That's kind of known and accepted, and things like holly are grown instead. But I suppose it's somewhat more difficult to do things about ragwort rather than a yew, which you can relatively easily chop down. It's very difficult to get rid of ragwort on a large scale.
Most of the countries in Europe have been reintroducing large carnivores. The other European countries are much bolder in doing this, and for some reason Britain is lagging behind.
Britain's had a reputation of being safe too long.
I mean, I for one would like to see the return of the brown bear, the wolf, the lynx and the wolverine. Now we've got the eagle owl making a modest comeback. We've had the accidental reintroduction of the brown bear. Sorry, the wild boar.
Bloody hell, that'd be amazing.
The accidental reintroduction of the wild boar, which is apparently doing very well. And we've had modest reintroductions of beavers. So I think some of the places, certainly in Scotland and maybe in the north of England, maybe parts of Wales, we should be looking into bringing back wolves, bears, lynx, wolverine. There are masses of this country that are just a monoculture, that are just they just grow one crop on it, and that's useless for wildlife. And even worse than that, there are masses of this country, masses of moorland that used to be forest, and now it's maintained as moorland just so that the rich upper classes can raise pheasants on it and shoot them for fun. Now, the pheasant isn't native to Britain, and something ridiculous like 5 million of them get released every year into Britain just for toffs to shoot. And these moorlands are maintained the way they are without trees because pheasants like eating the shoots of green shoots of newly growing plants. So that's why they burn off all the trees and undergrowth and things. Now, as well as being bad for the environment, it's bad for people as well because it causes floods. There have been massive floods caused in towns near moorlands because of the runoff, because there's nothing there to hold the waterlogged soil and the rain. There's no tree roots. So if we were looking to, having all these lands compulsorily replanted with trees, if we ban pheasant shooting, which I think would be a great thing,
especially for the pheasants,
replant the forests, and then we're looking for maybe 100 years down the line, we'll start to have the forests we used to have. And in the shorter term, we can be reintroducing some of these big predators to the more wild places of Britain. And as it stands at the minute, the populations will only be very small, but they'll be great for tourism, they will be great for the environment. It's win-win all round, but you will never get it in the current climate.
I would like to also point out that whereas every effort has been made to contact the copyright holders of these photographs, we believe that we are justified in reproducing them in this not-for-profit video using the policy of fair use. However, if there is anybody who believes that their intellectual or legal rights have been infringed, please contact us and we will do our best to bring the matter to a mutually acceptable solution.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's me again. Over the last few months you've probably noticed that On the Track has changed. Well, there's a very good reason for that. The thing is that between 2000 and 2017, that's 17 years for those of you who can't count, I was the main promoter of an annual event called The Weird Weekend. And it was a conference aimed at, about and for people from the Centre for Fortean Zoology. And although it wasn't all about cryptozoology, it was all full of events and lectures and film shows and exhibitions on subjects which I thought that people from the Centre for Fortean Zoology would be interested in. And it was all wrapped up in a nice overcoat of surreal fun.